Alright guys, welcome back. This is episode number 52 of Matt Chat, featuring part 2 of my interview with John Romero, this time focusing on Wolfenstein 3D. You know, one of the things I thought about when I was chatting with John Romero about his games was, what would the modern games industry look like today if it hadn't had John Carmack and John Romero? If there was no Wolfenstein 3D, no Doom, no Quake, what kind of games would we be playing? And I was wondering if it was sort of an inevitable push towards 3D first-person shooter games. Was that just something that was destined to happen, would have happened regardless of Romero and Carmack, or was it in fact a true stroke of genius on their parts? And I'll leave you to ponder that question, during this interview. Now here, Mr. Romero tells us about what was going on just before the creation of Wolfenstein 3D, its development, and a little about its reception, and of course its inspiration, Silas Warner's Castle Wolfenstein, another great game for the Apple II that we'll talk about here. All right, so without further ado, here is Mr. Romero.
That was a turning point for it, really. It was a turning point because it was fast and it was violent and the sound was awesome. It was our first digitized sound coming out of Sound Blaster instead of ad-lib sounds. So we had a bunch of new stuff coming out with Wolfenstein. We had 3D texture mapping in VGA. First 3D texture mapping for us. It was the second game that we'd done that in, but now it was in VGA. So it was like we were doing a new graphics mode, our very first VGA game with the texture mapping. It was our first gun game where we were actually shooting with guns and not like with a wizard's hand or a tank turret or whatever. It was like, this is the first-person shooter, definition here. The gun, the key controls that I had set up for Wolfenstein were the first FPS key controls. And the sound and the violence and the speed. All of those things were just, back then, those were huge. Every one of those things was a huge increase in entertainment back then on a PC. Like, nobody had, that game was 70 frames a second. And that was extremely fast, And so a 70 frame a second game, that's in VGA, that is 3D texture mapping, that's violent. It was just like, wow. I was really proud of it because I was like, this is what I've always, this is the kind of game that I've always wanted to play. Yeah, well, the inspiration for Wolfenstein 3D was Castle Wolfenstein from Silas Warner in 1981, and Muse was his company. Him and Ed Zaron that started that company, and that was a really groundbreaking game back then. I mean, everybody recognized it when it came out, and it actually is like the original stealth game, like the pre-Splinter Cell, type game. It was the original one. And it was, it was a huge impact on me. I mean, I played that game so much. I figured out how to get through every single castle. Every time you ran Wolfenstein, it was a new castle, right? The only thing was that the exits of every single room were the same. It was the contents of the rooms that all changed. So if you knew the layout of the entire castle by exits of rooms, you could just run right through the whole thing, you know, after killing guards and stuff. But you could run through and get to the exit pretty quickly if you had written out the whole layout. That's how much I actually played that game. It was a ton. But it was funny how huge that game was, and it had like one of the most annoying things in the world, which was hitting the wall and the whole screen going crazy, showing low-res graphics and stuff. You know, the low-res graphics was being used for layout of the high-res screen, right? It was like these low-res dots and stuff are used for collision detection on the low-res screen, and the graphics high-res screen echoed, you know, exactly where those things were on the screen, like the walls and doors and stuff like that. But so when it went nuts, it was like Silas was kind of showing you what he was doing with his collision and stuff, but it was annoying, you know, having that sound and that interruption. The game would have been, you know, it would have been even, I don't know, it is kind of weird. I wonder if he, like, added that in later. I never did ask him, why did you put that damn annoying screen craziness, you know, because maybe he didn't have it in there originally. It was too safe of a game. It didn't rattle you. It didn't scare you, you know. So you were scared of even hitting the walls. But I think, you know, having 9 keys to shoot, 9 keys to move around is already enough nerve-wracking, you know, for just movement and shooting. But that, you know, the game was a huge inspiration, and I played it, of course, until I fully mapped the game out, you know, and I was done with it, kind of. But I mean, it took a lot of plays to get to that point to figure out that there was a pattern and all that stuff. And then in, you know, 1991, when we were thinking about what is our next game going to be after we finish our second set of Commander King games, because we had just done this 3D game at the same time that we're doing this second set of 3 Commander King games. We also had a 3D texture mapped game that we'd written called Catacombs 3D, but it was EGA. It was an EGA, so it was like probably the only EGA texture map game ever made, because VGA is so much easier to do stuff in. But that came out definitely earlier than Ultima Underworld, which came out a week before Wolfenstein did. But we had this 3D game, and it was like, we're going to make another one of these for shareware, because we did this one for soft disk, and now we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to do a trilogy and all this stuff for Scott. And so one of the ideas that Tom had was, he called it It's Green and Pissed. That was like the title of the game, and it was like, so it's like a research lab, and the scientists are, you know, experimenting, and there's mutants, and they're killing everybody, and you go in there and you blast your way out and all this stuff. And I was just like, man, that is like the oldest story in the book. I totally don't want to play that game, you know. And so I'm just like, why not like remake Wolfenstein in 3D? And it was funny because it was like Carmack and Tom and I were all like, yeah, like it was instantaneous, like obviously yes, you know. Why wouldn't we want to do that? That would be amazing. Adrian Carmack never played games before, right? So he had no opinion on that. So we were talking gobbledygook to him. But it was like all 3 of us immediately knew we had to make that game when I mentioned it. I was like, done. Got it. You know, we know what it is already. We don't even have to like come up with design docs. We already know the game. We knew what Wolfenstein was. I mean, because it was a pretty simple game design, you know. It was more complex as we were making it, and then we had to scale it back because we defined, as we're making the game, we did define the core of the game had to be speed. Like, that had to be the core. Anything that slowed us down from that, we had to remove it. So the core, we kept true to the core. So we did throw in other code for dragging dead bodies and searching through bodies and stuff like that, but that stopped you from doing the killing, right? It stopped you from mowing shit down. So it was like, get rid of that stuff. Make it dead simple. All people needed, first of all, people are now in 3D. It's going to be hard enough just to figure out how to use a mouse in 3D and the keyboard at the same time and stuff. And it's enough that people are now in 3D that we need to keep it very simple. So the game design needs to just be something they don't even have to think about. They just need to worry about the experience of what's around the corner or what happens when I open the door and I just mow everything down that I see. There's no There's no one safe.
And that's all for this week's episode of Matt Chat. I hope you guys enjoyed it. You're probably aware that I'm having to chop out a lot of great material from Romero from this interview. It's almost 2 hours long. So what I decided to do, I'll make a few more of these videos with the highlights, of course. But then when I'm done, I'll take all the audio and just dump it into an audio podcast and make that available on Armchair Arcade and maybe iTunes. So for those who want to hear the whole thing, unedited, uncut, that will be an option for you later on down the road. So look forward to that. I thought I would leave you with a quotation from Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher. Talent can hit a target no one else can hit. Genius can hit a target no one else can see. See you guys next week.